hope that you all enjoyed the refreshments out there provided by Truman Pierce Institute and that you've had some good breakout sessions. We welcome you back together with us. And right before we have our last session for today, we have a couple of more sponsors or vendors who we want to allow the opportunity to speak to you all. Again, we appreciate our sponsors so much for providing the snacks and meals yesterday and the breakfast tomorrow morning. So first I'm going to have a flying classroom come on up and talk to us. Hey, come on.
Oh, wow. Thank you, guys. Good afternoon. Hope that you guys have had a beautiful day filled with knowledge, and you guys do amazing work. You should be applauding yourselves because the work of an educator and the work that you guys do is so incredible. Every child that you guys come and encounter with you're truly impacting their lives. So know that we appreciate the work that you do. My name is Dee, and I am with the Flying Classroom. And Flying Classroom is a K-12 digital curriculum that's based off of Captain Irving's explorations around the world. Captain Irving, at the age of 23, did a historic flight around the world. He was the youngest and first black man to fly around the world solo in a single engine plane. He faced many, many obstacles, and he was able to achieve that feat. But prior to doing so, he was a football star, a high school football star, and he turned down many, many scholarships to pursue aviation by a one-chance meeting. A black pilot who approached them and said, "Hey, have you ever considered being a pilot?" And he said, well, he didn't think he was smart enough. And it was that one chance, and his high school teacher, Miss Batiste, who nagged him every day to turn down football and pursue a career in STEM, that changed his life. So he has dedicated his life to really giving back to other kids and providing an avenue for them to learn about STEM and aviation careers. So if you guys want to learn more about the Flying Classroom, please visit us, and we'll be happy to share the work that we do, and hopefully we can work with you all. Thank you for your time.
And then we also have Shay from Touche Boutique, who will, I think, be coming. She may have a customer out there. I thought Dr. Bryant went. Here she comes. Let's welcome her.
Hello, my name is Shay. I'm owner of Touche Boutique with my niece Layla. She's 15. 15 years ago, Layla's dad was murdered, and we take care of her with the business. So she wants to go to vet school at Tuskegee, so I started it 13 years ago. So anyway, thank you.
And again, thank you to all of our sponsors and vendors. We appreciate their support. We are excited to welcome Tiffany Kessler for our last general session of the day. And she is coming to present to us on everyone's favorite topic, those EDGAR regulations. So help me welcome Tiffany Kessler from Brewstein and Manasavit.
Good afternoon. I almost said good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. I was going to use lavalier. I'll just hang out here at this mic. This is actually working pretty well. Wow, how mean is it that I have to talk to you about regulations? I'm between you and freedom. That's just like borderline torture. I'm so sorry. Well, I am Tiffany Kessler. I'm a partner at a law firm in DC called Bruce, Dean & Manasevit. We are a DC education firm. We've been around since 1980. If you're wondering why the heck I'm standing up here, we only work on federal education grants compliance. I have been doing this for about 16 years now. We work with state education agencies, school districts, for-profits, nonprofits, institutions of higher ed around the country and outlying territories. So we really focus on federal grants compliance. We do a lot of what I consider this proactive work where we present on the legal requirements. We also do audit defense work and litigation for those that don't listen. So, you know, pay me now, pay me later, kind of my MO. But ideally, if everyone were to listen to me, no one would ever need any help with audits. So there you go. It doesn't happen, but theoretically, right? So what I'm here to talk to you about are the very exciting education regulations that apply to your fiscal and administrative work. Right? I mean, we really saved the best for last today, didn't we? We're not talking about all that interesting academic performance stuff. I mean, boring. We're, you know, robotics and all that cool stuff outside. None of that will compare to this session. Got to set the bar pretty low, right? Before you're like, that wasn't so terrible. So this is going to be a lot of regulations. That's exactly what this session is designed to do. But it's because you should know that even pre-COVID, 21st Century is a higher risk program than other federal education programs because the majority of the subrecipients are nonprofit and community-based organizations which just don't have the experience with federal funds as other standard sort of more recipients like school districts or institutions of higher ed. So it's always been deemed to be a more high-risk program. And I have been on visits from the U.S. Department of Education. I've sat in on their monitoring visits of states. I've been to nonprofits and CBOs as part of state monitoring visits. I've defended the audits. I've spoken at the 21st Century Conference. And we see the same findings and issues and concerns. So I'm really here to talk to you about the other side of your after-school programs, which is the administrative side, which unfortunately, if not handled correctly, can bankrupt your organization in many circumstances. So it is an important part, though not the most sassiest and exciting part, really relevant to make sure you can stay in business. I also happen to just generally love the 21st Century program. I always have. It's just such a successful program. The data shows how much good this program can do. So I really want all of you to be successful and continue to be successful and not have these administrative or fiscal hiccups. So my understanding is each program did receive this phenomenal purple book. It is a page turner. So if you can't sleep tonight, I strongly recommend opening it up and looking at some of the rules we're going to talk about today. So essentially what happened is the rules we are going to discuss have been around for decades. These are not new. This is not something that has been very recent. What we did see in 2014 was a rewrite of these administrative rules, but they did exist even prior to 2014. They were also updated last year. Amid COVID, amid shutdowns, the Office of Management and Budget did make some updates to this. So what we're going to talk about is an overview as well as focusing on some of the updates that we've seen since last year. So please feel free to ask questions. I know no one will want to, and you'll talk to me afterwards, and that's fine. I will make myself available. But if you'd like to ask the question during it, I always take hypotheticals. Like, hypothetically, if we weren't doing any of this, would that be a problem? Right? And I'd probably be like, yeah, let's talk after the session. That's probably what I would say. Or hypothetically, if my neighbor wasn't doing this, you know, that's fine too. Okay, so what is EDGAR? They are actually the Education Department General Administrative Regulations. The U.S. Department of Education oversees the 21st Century program, as you know. They have a set of regulations that all of their subrecipients must follow. Pretty sure when you received your grant award, you signed assurances, you had a whole application. The thing is assurances are generally friendly reminders. You don't have to sign an assurance to have to comply with these rules. accepting federal funds means you have to comply with these rules. So you can't really play the we didn't know, we had no idea, I wasn't sure we had to do this. Because again, by receiving federal funds, you have agreed to comply with the rules that we have spoken about. So when we talk to EDGAR, not our best friend, not our worst enemy, probably somewhere in the middle. So in 2014, we had a change to EDGAR's rules, and that's because prior to these changes in 2014, different agencies had different rules to follow. We called them OMB circulars. State agency and school districts followed one circular. Nonprofits followed a different circular. Institutions of higher ed followed a different one. We had different circulars for financial rules and administrative rules versus allowability. So what they did under the Obama administration was consolidate 8 circulars into a single circular to try to have uniformity on how we were spending federal funds. So that's why we saw this major change in 2014. And that was called the uniform guidance. They took all of these various conflicting, in some ways, rules and created a uniform set of rules called the uniform guidance. That has been adopted by the U.S. Department of Education as part of EDGAR. So you'll hear me commonly refer to these requirements as either EDGAR or the uniform guidance. You have to follow both of them as recipients of the 21st Century Grant Program. Now, who made us do all of this? The Office of Management and Budget. They are tied to the White House. They are an executive agency, so they can't write law, but essentially what they did is they tasked all federal agencies, including the Department of Ed, and required them to adopt these rules, again, which they did, which have been in effect since December of 2014. Well, as part of that rule, they have to update this uniform guidance at least every 5 years, which was in December of 19. They were a little delayed. They came out with the proposed updates in January of 20. They had to go through public notice and comment, then COVID hit, but then we saw the final updated rule in August. So we're gonna, like I said, I'm gonna walk you through general overview, talk with you, and specifically point out areas that I consider to be those sort of hot topic areas where we regularly see non-compliance, as well as talk to you about some of the changes. So some of the general updates that they made last year were things like trying really to target greater areas of risk, namely trying to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse with federal funds. And you may not be familiar with this statistic, but actually the amount of federal funds, just federal grant funds that are wasted through fraud, waste, and abuse, the number is so high that if we actually could collect it, we could wipe out our national debt. Yeah, a lot of people like to steal, embezzle, misspend federal dollars. So we as in the federal government, not me, but the federal government, of course, always tries to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse, which is why we talk a lot about internal controls, strong processes and procedures. Tomorrow morning, we're gonna wake up and talk about policies and procedures. You probably won't sleep tonight knowing that because you'll be so excited. I know I can barely sleep when I know I'm gonna get to talk about it, but just hold your excitement down. But it's because that's how we reduce fraud, waste, and abuse, how we increase efficiency, performance, consistency, et cetera. Standardizing some terminology and whatever, we'll talk about all this stuff. Okay, so some technical changes is they put all the definitions under the same citation, so not super relevant, but exciting. Okay, this is probably how you're feeling, but remember, it is an accrual world sometimes. Guys, you gotta give me something here, right? I'm trying to make finance jokes. Exactly. Grumpy like the cat. That's how I feel a lot. Okay. So we're going to start with our first grant system. There are 3 grant systems you must have in place. Oh, I like when I go low. It's like yelling. It's like I'm yelling. That's great. Okay, I'll remember that. 3 systems: financial management, procurement, and inventory. So we're going to start with financial management. Now, I will tell you, I have seen 21st century subrecipients that are what we call inauditable, which means you literally have no records to audit. That's very bad, all right? You do not want to be inauditable. We like documentation that proves that you're not, for example, just taking the money and like buying a Corvette. And at the time, the state was like, Tiffany, they're probably not doing that. I was like, right, but you have no proof to show me that they're not. You have to remember, I'm a lawyer. People lie to me all the time. Like constantly, they lie to you all the time. I call myself an optimist at heart, but a cynic by trade, because people lie to me all the time in my job. I mean, really, like, we'll be ready to go into court, and I'm like, okay, right? Like, the shirt was blue. Yup, the shirt was blue. Okay, go ahead. What color was the shirt? It was red. Right? All the time. Not all the time, but a lot, more than I would like. So let's start with our first grant system, financial management. Now, this is what the law says. States follow state law. Everybody else has to have a financial management system that meets these 7 requirements. So yes, the state gets to do what the state wants because they have state law to follow, but the rest of us have to follow these more restrictive requirements. Specifically, number 1, identification of awards. Now, I do want you to know, I made my slides as a reference. I know you have them, happy to send them to everyone if you haven't had them sent already. You have the sites, you can look at this stuff in the book, not making it up. Identification of awards means your financial management system has to include very specific information. What grant year is this? What grant are we talking about? 21st Century is a 3 to 5 year grant. You have carryover. I need to know if you're spending this year's award or this year's carryover. And what the difference is and why that matters is because you have a certain amount of carryover. If you don't spend it in your carryover year, or you haven't what we called FIFO, first in, first out, and charge the earlier year, you could lapse funding, meaning you have to give it back. That is an enormous red flag in federal grants when you return money back. It just indicates a lot of poor planning, misspending, right? Not misspending, not spending actually, but poor planning, not following that plan, not following your budget. We don't like to see that. So your financial management your system itself has to include specific information. Your financial reporting comes down to consistency and accuracy. We really want to make sure that the data you're reporting to the state is consistent with what they find when they come out. Really, that's sort of the best summary of financial reporting. Accounting records is actually probably more detailed than you would think. It not only includes the amount of money you initially had, the amount that you've obligated. We're going to talk about what an obligation is and why that's a specific term that we have to use. But we want to know how much money you've drawn down or reimbursed, and as well as how much money you haven't obligated. We call that your unobligated balance. And that's a requirement. And the unobligated balance calculation is usually the trickier one that I don't see at entities. And I want to give you an example of what that is. Your own checking account, right? I can go online right now. Who doesn't use online banking? I do, right? I can go online and see how much money is left in my account. What I can't see necessarily from that are checks I have written that haven't been cashed. And it's that amount that is my unobligated balance. And why do we care about your unobligated balance? Because it's the unobligated balance that tells me if you're on track to spend. Now, my understanding is many of you have high carryover from last year, which is understandable given shutdowns and COVID. But we have to make sure we're spending that, which will end up resulting most likely in carryover for this year. But at some point, that catch-up is expected. Right? And if you fail to catch up, what ends up happening? Lapse of funds. And I will tell you, I live in DC, right? And you know, Congress doesn't agree on a lot of things right now. They're fighting about a lot of things. They always have and always will. But one thing everyone has agreed about in education, sort of across the board for decades, is education doesn't get enough funding. So how does it look when we return it back because we didn't spend it? Right? We can't argue we need more money in education when we're not spending what we have. So that's why it's such a red flag. That is the last thing that we want to see happen. And if you have been sort of following all of the stimulus funds, that is the problem that a lot of school districts, institutions of higher ed, and states are going to be having over the next 3 years, is spending like $1.8 trillion, no problem. So making sure your accounting records are detailed enough to show me what you spent, what it was for, where it was charged to, and that you are on track to continuously timely spend. Remember, your continuation awards are based on, right, that prior year performance, and at any time the state could say, you know what, you haven't performed, you haven't spent, you haven't been able to prove you're meeting these requirements, and cut off those awards. They're probably nicer than me. I'm not that nice. Okay, internal controls. This is mentioned in our financial management system, but you're going to hear me talk about this afternoon as well as tomorrow morning. Because internal controls are about protecting assets, safeguarding property, and the integrity of our programs. It's a general sort of broad category, but it's about making sure we are spending our funds in an allowable manner that not only meets the fiscal and administrative requirements we're talking about today, but also assists with increasing performance and helping students, which really was the whole point of this in the first place, right? Budget control. This is about making sure you had applications approved based on budgets. And I will talk mostly about looking at your expenditures, but we have to make sure we're tracking that back to your budgets. Now, in talking with the state, I know that some of the issues that we're having, which totally makes sense to me, by the way, is your budgets are probably shifting because you're having a hard time accessing personnel, right? Welcome to the entire country, which is why I think it's funny because some people who don't get it are like, but they have all this money. Oh, sure. And you know what? Some teachers are like, I don't care how much you pay me, I'm out. Like it just, right? So we get that, right? We're having trouble. In fact, the irony, again, I work nationally. I know people don't want more money. You know what they want? I know what you want. Teachers and nurses. They're like, stop giving me money. Give me people. I need people. People, right? So your budgets are probably going to change. So what's the key that I need to remind you of? Amending that budget and getting approval for that amendment. I get that your numbers are going to change. Your state gets the numbers are going to change. Their numbers are changing too. Guess what? We're all in this together, right? We haven't heard that a lot. But it's about making sure the process is in place. Because if you just overspend and your expenditures don't meet your budget, that's actually a compliance issue. Had you gotten approval, now it's not. This is really about communicating to the state. The state actually has a lot of power and authority when it comes to federal funds. They have the ultimate obligation to make sure that they're spent correctly. So the feds look to the state to make sure they're doing their job. So this is about communication. If you need to add on nurses, if you need to add on staff, if you need to increase salary costs or fringe or whatever else it is, talk to the state on how you plan to shift around those budgets to meet your needs and the students' needs to meet the goals and objectives that you've outlined, which I'm sure have changed given everything that has happened over the last year and a half. Man, it's been that long, year and a half. All right. Written procedures for cash management. We're going to talk tomorrow. Tomorrow, I am going to walk you through how to make sure your policies and procedures are compliant. And you will get to take that slide deck home with you and make sure that you are checking all the boxes we're going to talk about tomorrow. Because remember, that is not just a strong internal control, but a requirement under the financial management system. Same thing with our written procedures for cash management, allowability and cash management. Cash management is, are you on a reimbursement basis? Are you on a cash advance? Do you understand the difference? Because most 21st century subgrantees sometimes receive a small cash advance in the beginning, oftentimes are on a reimbursement basis. Do you understand what the difference is? Because if you accept a cash advance, you have to track interest. Do you receive cash advances? This is going to be the audience participation part. I feel like I shouldn't be the only one up here talking. That's the beauty when you're the speaker. You at least can try to get everybody else to say stuff. So are you on a reimbursement only? Some are saying yes, yes. Does anyone receive a cash advance? You're not going to raise your hand because everybody else just said you're on a reimbursement. That means you're probably not receiving a cash advance, or you shouldn't be. And this is an easy catch for auditors, right? A cash advance is when you draw down money before you've paid it out, and a reimbursement happens when you pay out something and then you draw down the money. So what two dates matter? The payment date and the drawdown date. Doesn't matter what you've said, what you thought. Auditors look at the payment date and the drawdown date. And if the payment date is after the drawdown date, it's a cash advance. You have to track interest. Otherwise, you could violate this whole other law called the Cash Management Improvement Act. So it's important to make sure we understand those distinctions. We put those distinctions into your policies and procedures. And why do we do that? Because the person who might be doing it might not know the difference. And we want to make sure our policies and procedures explain the difference. You have to realize part of what my job is to guess how people are going to mess things up. That's basically what I do. All right, I take rules and I say, how is someone going to mess this up? Not on purpose, mind you, right? Yes, there are people in education, unfortunately, that commit fraud and embezzle funds. We can't get away from that. But I'm talking about people that just didn't understand the rules correctly. And here's the example that I've come up with over the years. So before COVID, there were these things that we did called vacations. Do you guys remember those? Man, they were great. You didn't go to work. I've heard that they're really fun. And what do you do before you're going on vacation, right? What is sort of the penalty for going on vacation, right? Is you try to clear up your desk before you leave, because you know when you get back, it's like 3,000 emails and stacks of stuff on your desk, right? It's like kind of the penalty of taking that time off. So I always have imagined in my head the employee who's about to go on vacation trying to clear off their desk and saying, what's the big deal if I just draw down the money today? We wouldn't normally draw it down until next week, but I'm going to be on vacation, so I'm just going to do the draw. Then I don't have to hear the complaining that we didn't have the money in the accounts. I don't really think it matters. The reason why it matters is you just took something that would have been a reimbursement and made it a cash advance, right? Which again kind of brings in all these other laws, which we'll talk about in a minute. So how do we prevent that, right? That's my job. How could someone mess this up, and how do we prevent it? That's the control. Your policies and procedures, if they talk about the differences, the employee understands why they can't just do that. But if we have no instruction, they don't know, right? So that person's not trying to commit fraud. They're not trying to get the district or the CBO or whatever it is in trouble. They just didn't think it would matter. And we do see that a lot. So it's all about these controls. The other thing that the Uniform Guidance Update does is try to clarify areas where we saw non-compliance, like, for example, around timely spending. Making sure that we are spending our money within that budget period. You have a 3 to 5 year grant. This is what this section is getting into. It's saying, okay, you have a 3 to 5 year award. Let's say it's 5 years. Everyone has 5 years. Your period of performance is 5 years, right? You have talked about, you have submitted this grant application, you have been awarded these grant funds saying, this is what we intend to accomplish each year over the next 5 years. That is your period of performance. But you have 5 budget years within that 5-year period of performance. And it's making sure what you intended to do in year 1 happens, intended to do in year 2 happens. And yes, stuff happens, right? When you can't maybe do what you thought, or you did more than you thought, so now you can do better next year. Hence why we do our continuation awards, we communicate with the state, and these applications in some ways are ever moving, ever changing, ever being updated. But it's making sure we're not confusing that 5-year goal over that period of performance with an individual budget year. We're not budgeting over 5 years, right? We're budgeting each year for 5 years. So we have those new terms, period of performance with budget year. So that's why they added a budget period and a renewal. The budget period is to clarify that you may have more than one budget period within a period of performance. Now, at the end of 5 years, if you applied for a new grant, that starts a whole new award, right? That is not a continuation of your prior award. In fact, one of the goals of 21st Century is continuity after the end of the grant term, ideally. All right, when can you start to spend the funds? And this applies to each budget year. You are a discretionary program, meaning you are not a formula grant. You don't automatically receive these funds. We see formula grants in education. One of the biggest ones is Title I, if you've heard of it. That is a formula grant. Districts automatically get these awards via statute. But 21st Century is discretionary. You have to compete for it. It's a competitive award, which means you cannot begin to obligate your funds until your application is approved. Right? Any obligation you've made prior to that may not be charged to the 21st Century Grant Award unless you have specific approval to do so. Now, I keep using this word obligate, right? It is not necessarily an accounting term. It's actually a grant fiscal term. To obligate means to promise to pay. So I always think of it as like the swiping of the credit card, right? I swipe my credit card, that's my obligation. It assumes you are going to perform, and then I will pay you. What I want you to keep in mind is that this chart shows us that different things obligate on different time periods. Anytime you're buying property, now property, this is where the law is super annoying in many ways actually, but here's one example. When it talks about acquisition of property, they're talking about personal property, which is everything but real property. Real property being land. And I've always hated the term real property because it sounds like everything else is fake property, but that's not it. Real property is land. Everything else that is not land is personal property. So any property you're buying, doesn't matter what it is, basketballs, books, whatever, that obligates on the date of the contract or the PO or the printed out or saved online order, right? That is that date of obligation. Your employees, their salaries do not obligate when they sign their employment contract. Their salaries obligate when they work. So that means your salary today obligates today. Your salary tomorrow will not obligate until tomorrow. So if you have a budget period ending on September 30th, you cannot charge that employee's full salary. It could only be through September 30th because their salary doesn't obligate until they actually work. Any salary accrued on October 1 would have to be charged to a different grant award. Another area here is contractors, very much like property, obligate the date of their contract. Right, so employees and contractors are handled differently. The red flag is travel, because travel obligates when travel is taken, not when you buy travel. Remember travel, it's this thing that we used to do where you'd go somewhere else, you know, pre-COVID, PC, I call it PC, pre-COVID. Although I came here from DC, so obviously I did travel. I have yet to convince an airline that I am not paying for this ticket until I get on the airplane. Right, not gonna happen. You do have to prepay some travel, obviously, mainly airlines, right? Every now and then hotels will make you pay up front for one night or something to hold a reservation or a deposit or something like that. But I want you to keep in mind, you cannot reimburse yourself with federal funds until travel becomes a valid obligation, and it doesn't become a valid obligation until you take the travel. Now, one question I got was, well, is it getting on the plane or is it coming home? We assume you're coming home. Although I'd be lying to you if I didn't know of stories of people that didn't come home, by the way, and whether or not they could still charge that to the federal grant because the person was like, we like it so much here, we're not coming back. True story. By the way, I don't have to make up my stories because the most ridiculous things have happened in my 16-year career. Like, yeah, we can talk about that later. So because travel does not obligate until travel is taken, I actually don't recommend you prepay rental cars or hotel rooms, because you cannot get reimbursed for those until you actually take the travel. It also makes it really difficult if the travel is not taken, right? Because as we know, life happens, even pre-COVID, something could happen with family, or you're sick, you can't go, whatever, people leave their positions. You cannot charge a grant for a trip that was never taken. So we do want to make sure that we're not incurring expenses that we cannot be reimbursed for. Now, conference fees are not considered to be travel. They're considered to be a conference cost. So those you actually could reimburse for when you register. But again, assuming you attend the conference. Any questions so far on this? Because this is something that is usually missed. People do reimburse themselves for travel right away. And again, it can be an area of non-compliance. So like I said, just keep that in mind. I'd mentioned before about some cash management issues, and this really goes back to that advance payment versus reimbursement. A lot of people wrongly assume they are on reimbursements or cash advances when they are not. So it is really important to designate what you do, how you do it, and what that process is. How do you ensure your drawdowns are for reimbursements of items paid? Now, I don't think that necessarily means you have to document that the money has come out of your account. I think sending payments are enough, right? Making sure that those payments have gone out the door. But you do need a process in place to make sure you're not accepting the advance. And the only reason why I say this, you can take an advance, but the issue is that when you take cash advances, what EDGAR says is, number one, the advance has to be very limited to meet your immediate needs, i.e. like upcoming payroll, for example, but you have to track interest. And if interest accrues over $500, you have to remit any amount over $500 to the Department of Health and Human Services. Why Health and Human Services and not ED? Because the Department of Health and Human Services is the largest granting agency in the country. They're really the only ones set up to take back money, interestingly enough. So the issue is, if you take a cash advance and you don't track the interest, right now you are in a violation of those cash management rules. Now I have to tell you, when I first learned about this, what now seems like forever ago, I didn't think this would be a big deal. Because I don't know about you, maybe I have a terrible bank, but I get interest at like 0.0001%. Every year I get my statement, I've made like 2 cents. Literally 2 cents on whatever I have, right? So in my head, I was like, this can't possibly be a thing. I'm here to tell you that there was a district out west that had a $1.4 million cash management violation. 1.4 million. Because you might be thinking, well, I won't put it in an interest-bearing account. The law says you have to unless certain circumstances apply, and even then it will impute the interest onto the drawdown. So it doesn't actually, you don't actually have had to have made the interest, by the way, in some circumstances. If you just were like, oh, we won't put it in interest-bearing, we'll be fine. Nice try. People have totally tried that. It doesn't work. The federal government likes to collect interest on the money that you haven't drawn down. So they don't like it when we draw down the money and collect interest. This is where this is coming from. There's a whole thing here, right? Like this is, there's reasons why, okay? So it's making sure, again, this is why I recommend to everyone, explain the difference between a reimbursement and a cash advance. This is such an easy catch for auditors, and the last thing I want you to do is give your auditors an easy find. One of the things that is changing this country, because, well, many things have changed because of COVID, but with respect to federal grants, is recipients that receive over $750,000 of federal funds, and that's all federal funds from all federal agencies, have to get a single audit. So if you've never heard of a single audit, hopefully it's because you spend less than $750,000 of federal funds. But if it's more than that, you get an annual single audit. We don't want your auditors giving this finding. All right, really easy to catch, really easy to avoid. So these are the exceptions for not putting your cash in an interest-bearing account. It's that the aggregate award is under $120,000, which is unlikely. That the account, well, it could be likely. Account was not expected to earn in excess of $500 per year. Welcome to every account I've ever owned, apparently. Or the bank minimum is so high that it's like unrealistic. But you'd have to document why you can't comply with this requirement. Right? So again, this is like really where the technical stuff comes in. The last thing is you have closeout. Now, a new part of this rule is the state moving forward will have 120 days to close out their federal grants. You will still have less time than that. It's no more than 90 days. States often will still change this just to make sure they have enough time to collect the data that they need. But you have to make sure of 2 things. Number 1, that you're obligating within that budget period, right, each year. And number 2, that you're liquidating, closing out your books, paying the vendors that performed, and closing everything out during that liquidation period. And that's why these dates and deadlines are really important. Because unfortunately, if you purchase something or you obligate it outside the budget year, I don't care how much it helped kids. I don't care how inexpensive it was. It is not allowable, right? So that's why we want to make sure we are doing these things. And that's not what I say. That's auditors. You know, they're mean. I'm super nice. I'm actually not. You can ask my kids. They're fun. Okay. All right, so obligate within each budget period, liquidate before the closeout period, right? We have to do all of this timely to hopefully keep our continuation awards. The next super fun topic we're going to talk about is procurement. Everybody loves procurement right after time and effort. Who loves paperwork and putting out RFPs and bids, right? So much fun. I've never met anyone that doesn't enjoy procurement. It's just such, see, even over there, they're like, yes, it's awesome. I know, it's so great. All right, so your next system is procurement. I love to talk about procurement. Why do I love that? I actually can be fun. I don't want you to think I'm not, because I say like things like this are fun. I actually do know what fun used to be like. It's fun for me because this is where most of the fraud, waste, and abuse comes in. Why is that relevant for you? Because this is where auditors focus a lot on procurement. This is where we see the majority of fraud, waste, and abuse in federal funds. In fact, tonight, you got nothing better to do. Netflix, it's actually HBO and Netflix. There's 2 movies about education and grant fraud, right? Because why wouldn't you want to watch a movie about that? But it's Hugh Jackman, right? I'm selling it now, aren't I? I mean, Wolverine, come on. He plays superintendent of a district in New York off of a true story, Roslyn, New York. one of the largest grant fraud schemes ever. Movie is called Bad Education. It is a great movie. It is a true story, and it is all about embezzling of federal education funds. Another one is called All the Queen's Horses, and that was about a woman out west who embezzled, again, millions of dollars and was never at work and told everyone she had inherited a lot of money and bought all these horses, and really she was stealing millions of dollars in grant funds from the county. The county was going broke and nobody could figure out why. And it's because stuff like procurement was completely ignored and avoided and falsified. All right? You don't want to be the next story, although now I do debate who would play me in a movie, right? Because why wouldn't you, right? I'm sure a lot of you think about that too. If they were to make a movie of your life, who would play you? I have so many. I have so many on my list. Okay, so let's talk about procurement. Documentation. I will tell you the good and bad of education grant funding is if you don't have documentation to prove that it occurred, it did not occur, right? It is an affirmative obligation on all of you to demonstrate compliance. It is not assumed that you have complied. It is actually almost assumed that you haven't complied. So we have to document that, and procurement really rules here. You have to have documented financial management procedures, documented procurement procedures. Again, we're going to talk more about that tomorrow. I'm going to kind of hit highlights for you on what I'd like you to look at your own policies and procedures. Again, based on our experience and audit findings. Open and full competition is the preference. So we're going to talk about sole sourcing, which is what I know you all like to do because you just have vendors that you really like, and the vendors outside are lovely and their programs are awesome. You just still have to go through competition. Okay? The state's like, yes, yeah, because they know that this is what everybody likes to do. We're going to talk a lot about conflict of interest because we see this come up all the time. And you have some mandatory disclosures I want to make you aware of, as well as a new domestic preference requirement. So let's first start with conflict of interest because this happens all the time, and I am going to reiterate this tomorrow. Most conflict of interest policies violate your federal requirements. Most policies and procedures that I see say the employee cannot have a financial or other interest in any company that they hire or contract with. But look at the screen here. It's broader than the employee. It's that the employee, his or her immediate family, his or her partner, and any company that employs or is about to employ any of those people have a conflict. So it's not just you. If it was my husband's brother, that'd be weird because he's an only child, but it would also be a conflict on me. We'd have a lot to talk about, all right? So it's making sure that your policies and procedures are broad enough to cover the group that it is required to cover under federal law. And we're going to talk more about this tomorrow. Like I said, I can't give it all to you today. Like, I know you're just like, man, I can't wait to hear more about this, right? I can see it in your eyes. I can see the excitement. I love it. Organizational conflicts of interest. If you have a parent or an affiliate organization that provides you with oversight, or you have had this agreement with when you opened as a nonprofit, you have to have an organizational conflict of interest as well. You cannot just contract with them because they are your parent organization with federal grants. It automatically assumes a conflict. And why do we care so much about this? Because conflicts, if they potentially affect the award, have to be reported. But there's another thing I want to talk to you here about gratuities. Hopefully, everyone realizes you can't accept bribes. Fair? Right. Okay, good. If that's unclear, we should talk after this. But what I want you to know is gratuities, right? Look at what the law says. It says you must neither solicit nor accept gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from contractors or subcontractors. This is where I make everybody freak out. The vendors outside have really cool stuff on their table. Did anyone take any of those lovely signs or pamphlets or candy? Yeah, right? Cool stuff, huh? I would have. I don't live in Alabama, but I really like the food chart. Is that not something from a vendor? Did you accept a gratuity? Oh my God. Right? Yeah, now you're like, oh my God, I have to put that back. You don't. But what your policies and procedures are supposed to do is it says set standards for situation in which the financial interest is not substantial or the gift was an unsolicited item of nominal value. Meaning you actually can take gratuities from your vendors, but you have to make sure it's consistent with your policy. We are coming up on the holidays. How many people get fruit baskets from their contractors? It has been a pleasure working with you this year. Have a happy holiday. Do you have to throw the fruit basket out the window and videotape it to prove that you did that? Or what about people that tell me, oh, but I didn't eat the whole fruit basket. I shared it with everyone in my office. The acceptance of that is a gratuity, which if you don't have a gratuity threshold has now been a violation because the default rule is you're not allowed gratuities unless you set a threshold. So what do you think I'm going to recommend that you do? Set a threshold. Next question, what should that threshold be at? That's the next question I always get. The good answer is that's really up to you. I've seen it at $25, I've seen it at $100, I've seen it at $150, even $200. Because what I've seen is, no individual item more than $25, up to $200 per year. I've even seen it as, there can be discretion, but it has to be reported. Because as you can imagine, I go to a lot of conferences, and one time a vendor was giving away a TV, and the person who won it came up, and again, true story, the other person the person works with comes up and says, you can't accept that. Yes, I can, I won it. No, you can't. They start to fight about if the person can accept it. So then the question comes up of can they accept it? If they accept it, do they have to give it to their nonprofit or their school? Can they just keep it for themselves? And guess what the answer is? It's up to what your policies and procedures say, right? Because maybe your policies and procedures say if something else has been won or gifted, maybe you are allowed to accept it, but you have to remove yourself from any procurement. Or maybe it says you can't and you have to return it. I've seen agencies return iPads, iPods, all these things because they have violated their gratuity policy. I've seen pizzas sent. I had a client that had 10 pizzas sent to their office for the holidays, and they sent them a letter, documented them throwing them out, and sent the vendor a letter saying, please do not send these to our office again, it violates our policy. Meanwhile, I'm like, I like pizza. I don't work for you, I'll take it. These are sort of little things, but why do all of these things matter so much? Because you have mandatory disclosures, and one of the disclosures says, all non-federal entities, by the way, non-federal entities include nonprofits, institutions of higher ed, state education agencies, local education agencies, community-based organizations, everybody, basically, must establish a conflict of interest policy and disclose in writing any potential conflicts to the federal awarding agency. Second part, must disclose, for you it would be the state, all violations of federal criminal law involving fraud, bribery, or gratuity violations. I'm not trying to make your lives difficult, I promise. I have a husband for that. Come on, guys. I know it's the end of the day. You know that was funny. Come on. All right? But it's just making sure. I'll tell you, the whole point of this is transparency. I don't care if you get a fruit basket or cookies from a vendor. You know what? Awesome. I get it. It's part of doing business. What I care about is you are not continuing to hire them because they send that to you. That is what I care about. That is what the federal government cares about, and that is what your auditors care about. We want to make sure you have reasonable prices, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and that you are not just hiring people because you like them. That is what we are looking to. That is the entire point of this. So set the policy. I don't care where the amount is. Enjoy the fruit baskets. Eat the stupid pizza. But let's just be transparent about it. Right? That is really what this is about. We see too many audits that someone's brother or sister or mother was hired with no competition, no experience, didn't perform, still got paid. You don't want to be the next news story. We have two different kinds of procurement. Now the red, which I didn't say this before, but since you asked, the red means it's a change since August of 2020. So there's not a substantive change here, but what they did is they split procurement into two kinds, formal and informal. Informal being a micro purchase and a small purchase procedure, which are much more flexible, which we'll talk about, versus a formal like RFP or a sealed bid. All right, so they kind of divided them up. We're going to start with a micro purchase. A micro purchase is currently defined as a purchase under $10,000, which means you don't have to get bids or quotes, assuming the price is reasonable. Well, then everybody asks, well, how do you know the price is reasonable? So OMB added this language. It's based on research, experience, purchase history, or other information and document on file. What I always like to tell everybody with procurement is this: treat the money like your own money. Treat federal funds like your own money. I am redoing something in my house, right? A bathroom, right? Which means, of course, it's been going on for months and months, like it does, right? Now, if you were to get an estimate, would you hire one contractor and say, you know what, I like you so much, just give me an estimate, whatever it is, we're gonna hire you? Would you do that? Absolutely not. So why are you doing it with your education grants? What are you going to do normally? At least 2, if not 3 quotes. You're going to talk about timing, what their experience is, right? You're going to maybe talk to people that they used to work with, and you're going to make sure that that is going to be a good value. Reasonableness is not about cheapest. It is about value, getting a value for your dollar. I don't want you picking the cheapest if they're terrible and they're not going to perform. I want you having exceptional programs. I get that that means it's probably not the cheapest, but guess what? You have to document it. Where you're going to get the finding from an auditor is when you've picked one vendor who's the most expensive and you don't explain why. I don't see auditors say, I didn't agree with their final choice. You don't ever see a finding like that. You see the finding because the choice was not explained and the person that made that choice is no longer there. No one can explain why they picked them. So that's what we're looking for, is the documentation behind why you chose the vendors you selected. Also, why would a vendor give you their best price if they know you're not getting other quotes? They have no benefit at all in reducing their prices if they know that you are just going to keep using them. Oh yeah, let me re-up that. Just send me what the price will be for next year. Versus, oh, I have to get 3 quotes again. Can you send me one of those quotes? Guarantee the rate's going to be better than it would have been in the first example. The small purchase is next. It's $250,000. I don't know if the state has a lower threshold, but federally it's $250,000. You can always lower that as well, which I think $250,000 is a lot of money, so I usually like to lower that. But that requires at least 2 quotes. Of course, 3 is better, but 2 is better. 2 is at least required. 3 would be better. But it's making sure, right? Essentially here again, we're really looking at price, performance, et cetera. Then our formal procurements are your RFPs and your bids. That's over $250,000 from a federal perspective. This is really the biggest issue though. They're called non-competitive proposals, what everybody likes to call sole sourcing. This is the old, but Tiffany, we really like them. They helped our students perform really well last year. They're so nice. Did you see what they give out at the table? Right? So here's the thing with sole sourcing. The law mandates full and open competition. It then says non-competitive procurement is allowed in 5 scenarios. So number 1, if you are going to sole source and not compete out a contract, you have to justify it under one of these 5, and we're going to talk about them. The first is it's a micro purchase, because I just told you an expense under $10,000 does not have to have bids or quotes if you can show the price is reasonable, which you'd have to document. Now, what you can't do is order $9,000 worth of paper, $9,000 worth of paper, $9,000 worth of paper, because we can add. We are on to that. We being auditors, remember, I work at a firm, I'm not writing up anything, but auditors and the feds, they can add those up. So don't buy $8,500 worth of computers 4 times without getting bids or quotes. Now, how do you know that? Let's talk a little specific. Let's say you thought you only needed $8,500 worth of computers. Let's bring this to COVID life. Pre-COVID, you were like, I need $8,500 worth of computers. COVID hits, you now need $900 million for computers. Okay? What you do is you didn't compete it for the $8,500, you didn't have to. But now that you know you're going to hit the next threshold, now you do the competition. That will make the auditors happy. You did it later for the next set of purchases. Even if that next purchase is only for only for another $8,500, you already had $8,500, right? Now you can show, well, when you add them together, we did do the RFP purchase. That will work, all right? Because again, things happen, we get that. Number 2, the item is only available from a single source. I want you to use this with caution. This is, they have a copyright. This is, we need the update from what we bid out last year. This is not, but we already use them. All right? This is also not, we really like them, they do a great job, they're so nice, they took me to dinner last week. None of that falls under this, the item is only available from a single source. Because here's the reality, and your auditors are going to come down on you for this. We are a large nation. You are not allowed to give geographical preferences. So you cannot give contracts to vendors because they are in the state or in your county or in your district. None of that is allowed with federal funds. So the next thing that people tell me is, oh, they gave me a letter that they're the only company that can teach reading to 3rd graders. First of all, that can't be right. I am not in academics. I do not have what you do. I don't understand the academic portions of programs. I don't know how to best improve achievement of students. That's not where my area of expertise is. But I do know that in this great country, right, there's probably more than one company that can teach reading. I had one nonprofit tell me, but they can do reading and math. And I was like, again. I go to a lot of conferences, I meet with a lot of vendors. I'm pretty sure if I asked them if they could do reading and math, there'd be many of them that said they could do that. So, I mean, I could give you a letter telling you I'm a pretty princess, doesn't make it true, right? You have to trust these letters. Everybody can write a letter about how they're unique. Doesn't mean that they're a sole source. So sole sourcing requires that you do an independent review to determine that they're sole source. But I should warn you too, it should always be the exception because the rule is to go through competition. And like I said, you will be amazed at who can come out of the woods. Now let's say you do have a program you love. Let's say the program is called Summer Learning. You love it, your kids love it, your teachers love it, you really like it. Then what you do is you put out the bid that says we want summer learning or equal or better. Let the vendors tell you why they can do just as good. If you don't agree, you've gone through competition. All right? Put the burden on the vendors to tell you why they can meet your goals. And I tell you this, I have an extreme example that's true, but I work with a lot of universities as well, and they have a huge naval program, and they needed a flight simulator. And their head of procurement was like, Tiffany, I know you're going to tell me that I have to bid this out, but we're talking $3 million here. It's not like I can just drive to the store and buy a flight simulator. I was like, I hear you. You know, I advise you make the call. I'm telling you the preference is going to be to procure it out. He's like, it takes me 6 months. I mean, we don't have that kind of time. I mean, he was just hemming and hawing. True story again. 6 months later, he calls me. He got 3 bids back from his RFP and ended up saving the university $1.2 million. So if he can find a flight simulator, you see where I'm going here? Bid it out. It's you getting the best value for your programs. Now, can you bid it out and maybe do a 2-year contract subject to funding in the subsequent year? If your policies and procedures allow it, absolutely. Can you do a multi-year contract? Again, you'd have to do it subject to federal funding, right, to make sure you get that continuation award. But you could do it every 2 years if your policies and procedures allow for it. So the next is there's a public emergency for the requirement that will not permit delay resulting from publicizing a competitive solicitation. So this is the one that comes up like, oh, well, it's COVID, so we can sole source. There's more to the sentence than there's a public emergency. Okay? The sentence is saying there is a public emergency for which publicizing the procurement will not permit delay. So that doesn't mean you can just sole source everything, but it does mean when there's any sort of a natural disaster or like this little global pandemic thing. For right now, for example, a lot of districts around the country are having trouble getting like filters, right? Air filters for air quality. If you find a vendor that just has them, you could buy it. I think that makes sense. I think that's a justifiable sole source. Pandemic, things that are hard to obtain. I feel like every time we turn on the news, all you see are all those shipping, right? The shipping outside of California where apparently no one knows how to take out the containers. So if you're having trouble getting items right now, I think you can get there, but it's just not for everything. Now, if you can convince the Alabama State Department of Ed to say you can sole source, guess what? You get to. So send them fruit baskets. Totally kidding. Yeah, please don't. That violates their gratuity policy as well. Or, this is my favorite one. After soliciting a number of sources, competition is deemed inadequate. You tried to go through an RFP. Nobody else could do what you needed. So guess what? You get to pick who you want. Right? The preference is always competition. There is a new domestic preference. It is a preference, but your policies and procedures have to be updated to say, to the extent practical, we will purchase goods produced in the United States. That is a new requirement. Now, another thing I want to put on your radar is you have to make sure for every contract over $25,000 that your vendors are not suspended or debarred. That is a requirement. So you want to put that into your procedures. How do you ensure they're not suspended or debarred? You go to sam.gov and type in their name, and hopefully no results found shows up. What do you do to document that? You print it out. You print screen, or you save it as a PDF and you put it in a file somewhere. Exactly. You get the vendor to give you a certification saying they're not suspended or debarred, or you put into their contract that they are telling you they are not suspended or debarred, and guess what? You've now met this requirement. There's another new rule. This is new as of August 13th. You are prohibited from contracting with certain telecommunication and video surveillance companies, as well as all of their subcontractors. There are many companies located in China. Now, I will tell you, when this rule came out, I was like, how on earth am I supposed to figure out what companies in China the federal government now finds are prohibited, as well as every single subcontractor for them? The good news is OMB, the agency I told you about before, said any company that is prohibited will be on sam.gov. So this means a new policy and procedure we're going to put into place, which I will reiterate again tomorrow, is you will not only check your contracts over $25,000, you will also check any contract for telecommunication or video surveillance equipment and make sure they're not suspended or debarred. All right, so we don't have to research the Chinese prohibited government or terrorism organizations. We don't have to spend time. I wouldn't recommend Googling that right now. But that is a new rule. But at the crux of all of this is your contract administration system, and I cannot underscore this enough. I cannot tell you how many findings we see for work that was paid for with federal grant funds that never happened. This is such a big issue, and it is so easy to prevent. Watch Bad Education, by the way. Gosh, it's so good. So good. It'll make you be like, man, no wonder Tiffany loves her boring job. But great example in DC. All right, I live in Virginia, but I work in DC, and there was someone at a local school district who was fired, started a transportation company, had a friend that still worked in the district, got names of students, which by the way is also a violation of FERPA, sent false invoices for transportation to their accounting office, naming the students that they picked up, which never happened because it wasn't a real company, and was paid hundreds of thousands of dollars because not one person checked to see if that actually happened. So your contract administration system should somehow build in that someone is making sure every invoice you receive has happened. It sounds like such a simple thing to do. I get it, whether you're big or small. Give it to whoever the person is who knows that this should have happened. But as I've said before, if you treat this money like your own money, what would you do? If I mailed you an invoice for house painting, what would you do? What's one of the first things you would do after you open that letter? $1,500 for your house painting. Maybe walk outside and see if your house was painted, right? I mean, I forget a lot of things my husband tells me, right? Maybe he told me we were getting the house painted. I have no idea. But one of the first things you would do is walk outside and see if your house was painted. right? We don't do that a lot. You know why? Because all those people who paid all those invoices for work that never happened, you know what they thought? Why would someone send me an invoice if the work never happened? Because people can be criminals. That's why. That's the actual true answer. Now, sometimes there are mistakes, but I will tell you, when we talk a lot about internal controls preventing fraud, waste, and abuse, one of the biggest things they talk about is people will test a system and just see if it gets through. Because if they get a call and say, we couldn't verify this happened, the person goes, oh, my mistake, I totally sent that in error. Yeah, it didn't actually happen, right? And the person goes, oh, okay, no problem. But guess what? If that first one gets paid, what do? They send another one, and then they send another one. So this is why we talk about this. Every year, the U.S. Department of Education, their Office of Inspector General, puts out a report. They put it out twice a year on fraud, waste, and abuse just in education, and it is always around $1 billion. Just in education funds. So let's have that conversation on how we need more money in education. Let's tighten up our controls. That's why we talk about this stuff. So we get a bid or a quote, we enter into the PO or the requisition, we get the invoice, we make sure that actually happened, then we pay them, then we reimburse ourselves. That is the process. So let's talk about the ugly truth about allowability. See, even if it's a sad, pathetic laugh, I'm taking it. All right, so in order to be allowable, your costs have to be necessary. They have to be reasonable. They have to be allocable. We're going to talk more about this. Necessary is for the performance or the administration of your grant. Reasonableness is cost, and allocability means it actually benefited your program. Most costs will fail for that first line. The other rules, complying with the cost principles we're talking about, the terms of your grant award, consistent with your policies and procedures, in accordance with the generally accepted accounting principles. Do we have any accountants in here that are familiar with raise your hand. So if you have any questions, ask her in the back, because I don't know anything about the generally accepted accounting principles. But notice here what I have bolded too, adequately documented. And then of course, in accordance with your budget, period. So necessary for the performance or the administration of your grant. What does that mean? It is in your grant application. It's in your budget. If it is not in there, it is not allowable. So if you have a great idea on how to meet your goals and objectives, what do? You amend it, right? Reasonableness comes down to cost. How do you prove the cost is reasonable or of a fair market value? Guess what? It follows your procurement system that we just talked about. Anytime you go around your procurement system, we will assume the cost is not reasonable. It's why we don't like sole sourcing, right? It's an exception to the competitive procurement. It's why auditors do tend to look more closely at the sole sourcing exceptions. But it is making sure we're getting that, remember, best value, not cheapest. Okay, always best value. And then allocability can be very easy in theory. It can be very difficult in practice because allocability is saying, did my program benefit from this expense? All right, so allocability is the documentation of showing if you bought a printer for your 21st century after school director's use, how do we know that the director's using it? We have seen findings because when the auditor walks in, the printer is still wrapped in cellophane in the back of the room. Well, guess what? I argue a lot of things, but it's really hard for me to argue that that printer was necessary or allocable when you didn't unwrap it, right? We even saw a program one time it was technology that tracked student performance K through 12. It was actually a really cool program. It cost the district $3 million. When they came to install it, they didn't have the land capacity to use it. Well, let me ask you this. If you buy something you actually can't use, is it allocable to the grant? Nope. They had to pay $3 million back. So ask yourself, do you have time to implement the cost, the capacity to use what you are purchasing? If you do not, that cost can be questioned. Applicable credits means you are charging the actual cost of the item. So if you get a rebate or a discount, you cannot take that rebate or discount and put it to general funds. That's overcharging the federal government. Again, kind of like easy in theory, but a lot of things we don't think about. So if you use a credit card for your federal grant purchases and you get cash back, did you know you're supposed to figure out the amount of cash back that actually was from those federal funds and proportion that back? Yeah, auditors are starting to look at that too. So much fun. I told you guys this would be fun, right? I know, don't hate me, messenger. Also, most of you have an indirect cost rate that you're charging to your grant award. If you are not familiar with that, please come and find me. If you want in the morning, we can chat indirect costs. But it's essentially just making sure you're charging costs either as direct or indirect, right? Not double charging, what we would say. Again, if you're not familiar with this, I'm happy to talk to you more about it. What you need to know is that 21st century, because of its supplement not supplant requirement, means you have to use your unrestricted indirect cost rate, which is usually a lower rate than an unrestricted rate, which can be applied to some other programs. Again, this is like really sort of straight level accounting. Okay, so in addition to being necessary, reasonable, allocable, in accordance with GAAP and all those other things, there are 56 selected items of cost, so we're going to talk about every one. No, we're not. Because I feel like tonight you're going to want to go and read all of them, so I don't want to like destroy your fun night ahead. But there are 56 items in the EDGAR book where the federal government talks about if those costs may or may not be allowable. And it will come to no surprise that it's not yes or no. Right? It's like maybe allowable if, not allowable unless, which is super annoying, like not allowable unless. Why not just say allowable if, but they don't do that? Or a couple things are totally unallowable. So let's talk. First, advertising. Advertising is only allowable if it serves a programmatic purpose. So if you are trying to notify students where your entity is of your program, that could be allowable for outreach. But if you are saying, our program is the best in the state, unallowable, right? Marketing is not allowable. Outreach is allowable. Just throwing your name on things and using federal funds to pay on it, not allowable. You have to really show you're dealing with program outreach versus general marketing. Alcohol, not allowable. Though I do think it would make many of my meetings more enjoyable. Entertainment costs are unallowable without permission. So this is really insert all field trips. All field trips are sort of deemed to be unallowable unless you can show there's a programmatic purpose, meaning there is a clear distinction between a hands-on science museum and experiences children can have versus riding a roller coaster. And yes, I've had science people tell me, oh, we're studying the trajectories of the roller coaster. Like, no, like, come on. Or we're going to fly our students to Epcot so that they can experience all of the countries around the world. I was like, I literally remember in 3rd grade, my desk was a country because I had to make a food from that country. And I'm pretty sure you could still do that today, right? You can't fly your class. It was, right, like, good try, right? Aren't you like, that was a good try? Totally, yeah, no. hard no on that one. Participant support costs. Anytime you're going to pay someone who is not an employee for conferences or training, you need approval from the state to do that. So it has to be really clear in your budget. And then time and effort. Who pays their employees with federal funds here? So who loves time and effort? Yes, I know, right? So much fun. Do not fret. We are going to talk all about time and effort tomorrow morning because I know, like you, there is nothing more I'd rather talk about when I first wake up than time and effort documentation. It's like the most exciting thing. You're going to see me just dancing on the hallway tomorrow, so excited to do this stuff. But it's a great example. What the EDGAR says is if you are going to pay employees with federal funds, it's only allowable if you keep time and effort documentation. Right? That's a allowable only if, right? So we're going to talk about that. If you're not familiar with that term, you may keep the documentation, but just call it something else. But this is an area where if you don't keep the right documentation, Auditors will absolutely look for this, and if you don't have it, all of your salary costs are automatically unallowable. So it should probably come as no surprise that this is the #1 finding in audits all the time, and I have defended them up to about $132 million in one district, one finding. So they can be pretty substantial depending on how large the entity is. And then, of course, I already mentioned the telecommunication and video surveillance. That's one of our newer requirements, but again, figured out a way for you to easily kind of comply with that, which we will again reiterate tomorrow in your policies and procedures section. And then travel. You have to have a clear travel policy. Most state law travel is more restrictive than the federal travel requirements, but the basic default rule is if you don't have your own travel policies, it defaults to the federal policy or your more restrictive state policy. What I've put here are things I want you to think about, which is one of the requirements is when you go to a conference, you have to justify why that person's attendance is necessary. So making sure that you're doing that. Are you charging travel on a per diem or actual or a combination? Up to you. We just have to be really clear on that. And just making sure the reimbursement is really clear, because I imagine you as well get a lot of questions on travel, right, from your employees that are going on travel, just like you would have questions. Well, am I going to get paid for breakfast, and can I have a coffee, or is it like $2 where I have to like just drink water all day, right? It's kind of like what we all try to figure out. And then our third system is inventory management. And I know, right? Who doesn't love a good Dwight Schrute meme? Come on, he's great. So, because we all feel like this when you have to do inventory, right? But remember, you have to do inventory of what you are purchasing. There is a different definition for equipment than there are for supplies. Computers are deemed to be supplies, but as we all know, what is more likely to get stolen, the giant conference table or the laptop? Right? So if we are going to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse, what are we going to protect? The laptop, right? Although, again, true story of someone literally cutting a giant conference room table in half to steal it out of a school. Yeah, because I used to give this example of no one's gonna steal a conference table, and the auditor came up to me when I was done and was like, I have a story. Yeah, they actually literally sawed it in half and dragged it out of the school. It was caught on camera. Like, what are people doing? And then I was like, how did they put it back together so that it worked the same way? Like, not really the appropriate question, but I was like, really, like, you'd have to like reinforce that, right? I mean, the auditor was not amused that I was more interested in how they actually used it. Another interesting fun fact, most TVs in school districts go missing around the first weekend in February. Anyone want to guess why? Super Bowl, and then they show back up later that week. I mean, really, you can't make this stuff up. Okay, so where was I? Equipment. We want to track, right, our equipment. You have to track equipment. It is a strong control to track those assets that might go missing more, like your supplies. And then these are all the requirements that have to be met from your inventory. You can tell up here really detailed property records with serial numbers, identification numbers. What is usually missing from this list is the use and condition. That is usually what I find missing from inventory. Now, it doesn't have to be like Amazon's 52, like used, slightly used, really new, kind of new in a box, new out of the box, whatever. I need like new, used, damaged, disposed of. Like I need some category that is telling me what the use is and condition is of those items. So it's just making sure you are meeting these federal requirements. Now, this is a physical inventory every 2 years. You have a year-by-year grant, so you should be doing it annually, right? Just because you don't know what you need if you don't know what you have. And then, of course, investigating loss, damage, or theft. This does not mean you're like bringing all your employees like, where were you on February 3rd when the TV went missing? But if someone is saying something has been stolen, you do have to file a police report. What I don't want to see happen is what I have seen at other districts when I've gone there is I've asked the head of inventory, like, well, what happens when something is missing when you do inventory? And he responded, I just take it off the list. I spend a lot of my life not reacting to things. And I was like, don't react, don't react. You're just gonna freak out this poor guy who thinks he's gonna lose his job, right? And I was like, well, that's not the ideal way to go about that. Like, you don't just take it off the list, right? We have to investigate it. This is federal property. You hold title, but it's conditional. It's not actually yours. And the federal government wants to make sure we're tracking it. Same thing with use. Right? This ties to allocability. If the 21st Century Program bought it, it has to benefit the 21st Century Program. We can't allow others to use it if they don't pay their proportionate share. Right? If you're running your program out of a school and they really like the equipment you're keeping there and they want to use it during the day, can they? Yeah, but they have to pay for their use. Right? Now, it's cleaner to just say no, but they could, but they have to pay for it, right? That's use and allocability kind of coming together. And then making sure we have really clear disposition rules as well to make sure that you are just not getting rid of things without documenting it. Here's the thing, okay? If you buy equipment that's over $5,000 and it is still over $5,000 when you go to dispose of it, you may actually owe the federal government some money. That's what the disposition rules say. But if it is depreciated below $5,000, you have to just formally dispose of it, follow state law, and then you want to pull an office space and put it out in the parking lot and beat it with a bat? Go for it. You know, they have places now that you pay to do that. Smash. Have you heard of a smash room? I cannot wait to have an experience at a smash room. I feel like I have a lot of angst to get out. I feel like I would rock. I have a 2- and a 4-year-old, so you can imagine the angst that I have just getting through dinner time. It's like a thing now, so just, take all those old computers, put them in the parking lot, let everybody smash them up. Employees will probably love it after you formally dispose of it. All right, after you do that. And then, of course, the state. I want you to be aware of the state's responsibility here. The state is required under law to make sure that you are following all of these requirements. This is why they monitor you. It's not because they're bored. It's not because they have nothing else to do. They have to comply with all the state rules around the 21st Century After School program. They also have to make sure that all of you are doing 2 things: meeting the terms and conditions of your grant award and following all of the EDGAR rules that we are talking about. They are required to write up reports when they find noncompliance. They're required to provide technical assistance. They're required to evaluate your level of risk, to put conditions on your grant if they don't think you can comply, and to not permit continuation awards if they don't believe you can meet the terms of these conditions. If they fail to do that, they get a finding from the U.S. Department of Education. So it is in very much a trickle down. It's USD making sure the state is complying and the state making sure that their subrecipients are complying. It's why there's so much oversight. And to the state's credit, it's conferences like these that allow subrecipients to be successful, both from a performance and administrative standpoint. And then if there is an audit finding, if you do get any audit finding from the state or from your single auditors, actually really from your single auditors, those findings go to the state, and then the state gets to decide if they want to require a repayment or not. So we want to maintain really good working relationships with the state, don't we? Right? Because they are ultimately the ones who get to decide if you get to keep your money or get more money. But as I had mentioned earlier, and then real quick, I know I don't want to take up too much time on the GEPA side, but also just know, if you get audit findings from those single audits or from the state, the rights and responsibilities of the parties are under a law that is in that purple book called GEPA, the General Education Provisions Act. It just talks to you about your rights to a hearing and to appeal if you have findings that you don't agree with. But the last piece I do really want to make sure that you are aware of are the single audit requirements, because you have to make sure you are calculating, and this is on your CFA, which is your schedule for expenditure of federal awards. It's usually part of just your financial documents that you have to complete. But if you expend over $750,000 of federal funds, and this is all federal funds, so it would include any money from the USDA, from the Department of Ed, from Labor, HHS, DOJ, whoever it is, you have to get an annual single audit. And especially with all the stimulus money that's come down the pipeline, a lot of entities for the first time now have to get a single audit. And you have to procure your auditors through your procurement process. You do hire them, right? And it's expensive. You have to make sure you've budgeted for it. It can be charged to your federal awards in proportion to how much federal money that each program is giving you. But it is something that you have to do. It will be a condition of future funding. You have to upload your audit to something called the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. If you fail to do that, I always recommend to the state to make the uploading of that a specific condition. Failure to get a single audit violates subpart F of the uniform guidance that we've been talking about. So there are, as you can tell, a lot of rules here. So I didn't want to just give you rules, I at least wanted to give you resources. I've given you links to the online versions of the EDGAR rules. Now the purple books that you have include not only some of the EDGAR provisions that absolutely apply to your grants, that again, I've put all those sites in the slides for you, but they also include the uniform guidance, and it includes some guidance documents as well that are helpful. But I've also tried to give you some online resources as far as what you can use. And if you do have to get a single audit, the link here, the 2021 compliance supplement, that is what auditors use to audit you. Now, the document is like 1,600 pages. You don't have to read 1,600 pages, I promise you. In part 6, there's a 21st century section. It's like 4 pages. But that will tell you exactly what your auditors will look at from a compliance standpoint. And guess what? It's really gonna cover everything we've talked about: financial management, procurement, inventory, allowability, because allowability to be necessary defaults to your grant, which is why they also look at your grant award. So I know that was a lot of information, and I'll tell you what, if you guys wanna stay for like 3 more hours, we can just like dig right into this. Who needs dinner or drinks after a long day of a conference? But listen, I do want to thank you all for your time. I want to thank you for allowing me to end your day today. I realize there were probably a lot of more fun options, maybe, but I will be back with you in the morning. I'll try to top this. I know the bar has been set so high, but I'll see what I can do. So thank you all. Good luck. Enjoy your night. I don't know if you're coming up. Thank you.